Hi, Spots and Cheap Pops, you're on the air.
Ladies and gentlemen, High Spots and Cheap Pops presents this week's Moment in the Valley. And my head is huge. I usually don't have this big of a situation, but we are excited and we are bringing to you another interesting topic we don't always get in our weekly podcast. And this week, we're going to start it off with a new feature we're going to have each week on Moment in the Valley. We're going to have my man, Vigilante Talk, one of the best TikTok creators in terms of professional wrestling takes on the planet. We're going to start incorporating some of his content on Moment in the Valley, and we're super excited for his debut and his love letter to last Monday night's Raw and the Attitude Era.
Holy fuck! The Rock approves my content and proves me right. Let's talk about it because that's what you follow me for, or should follow me. Blood, fuck yous, and all kind of shenanigans to close out Raw. Is WWE changing its approach? Fuck yes. If there was one night where this was proven, it was last night. In a quote-unquote surprise appearance by the Brahma Bull Bloodline boss, he proves me right when I said he doesn't need a 20-minute segment to add to the storyline and move forward. His entrance, electrifying, no mic work, no engaging, just few words off the mic for Cody. Tonight, I'll make you bleed. Sometimes less is more. The moment was one of a kind, and one that really represents a final boss. The show-closing ass whooping by The Rock was so different from everything else on Raw, it left some people questioning what the fuck is going on. While some of us older guys are happy, we are seeing glimpses of the Attitude Era. Welcome, kids. This is the type of cinema we grew up watching. Also, shout out to Cody for the ultimate babyface act. For those saying the Bloodline storyline is boring and stale, eat your mofoking heart out. CM Punk segment was great, but once again, got outshined by The Rock. I guess some things don't change. If you know, you know. What's your thoughts on this? This was one of the best episode of WWE Raw in a long time. Let's talk about it.
All right, I agree with almost 99% of what he said there. The one thing I don't agree with, though, I think that McIntyre Punk segment was the shit. But we're going to get into all of that on a later episode of High Spots and Cheap Pops with my boy Vladi Dottie. But Moment in the Valley, we'll touch on recent topics and how it relates to the past. Just other things that, again, don't get talked too much during the regular podcast that we do. The Attitude Era is something that Vigilante Talk spoke of. The Attitude Era. Us old guys are getting the same feels. Again, beautifully put. I do as well, but I think this era, and by the way, folks, this is going to be crazy because I know a lot of us old dudes will say, nah, man, it was so much better back in the day. But it is my belief, my true belief, that this era of WWE is going to be the greatest era in the history of the company. And this is how I came to this conclusion. First of all, we're really just getting started. Cody hasn't even won the title yet. But I'm going to call this the Triple H era. It might be a new golden era. Because since this man has taken over, he has brought it to, in my estimation, the best level from top to bottom of entertainment that WWE has ever produced. And we are going into the finer reasons why I'm right and anyone who disagrees with me is wrong. I'm going to put on my special blue hat for this mother chucker. First thing we're going to talk about is the storylines. The attention to detail in terms of what Triple H is bringing to the table. And from top to bottom. You saw things on this past Monday Night Raw where you saw The Rock as he was beating the leaving piss out of Cody, as we saw with Vigilante Talks' video. I would argue there was a reason that John Cena and Stone Cold Steve Austin was on those trailers. Why would they have those two guys on one of their trailers instead of their current stars? That's the kind of detail that we're seeing. The reactions and the things in the foreground, like Drew McIntyre talking to Paul Heyman last night while R-Truth and Miz were doing their thing. These little Easter eggs and those little nuggets and this long-term storytelling that Triple H has always said he prefers. Triple H has done that to a point that is brilliant. And I think it's something that is the evolution of what storylines are. And Triple H is killing it right now. That's one thing from top to bottom. And if you look at the WWE's storylines, yeah, you had Stone Cold and Vince. Yes, you had The Rock. Yes, you had the corporation. And yes, you had, but you also had the invasion, right? You also had a 70-year-old woman giving birth to a hand with afterbirth pouring and dripping off of it. Whilst everybody in the room was mocking on the disgusting scent of this 70-year-old woman. You had a 55-year-old, now shamed pervert telling a young woman in her early 20s to bark like a dog for him. You had a man have his cock cut off and then went to become a crazy whack job conspiracy theorist. And tell me when I'm telling lies here, folks. Goldust came out with a ball gag in his mouth, licking Luna Vachon's foot because they had been engaging in a sadomasochistic relationship. I mean, there was a lot of embarrassing, horrible storylines that took place. You don't have any of that. All the mid-card stuff here, for the most part, is at the very least passable. You're having things like Rey Mysterio and Santos Escobar. Whether you want to admit it or not, LA Knight is still just a mid-carder. The mid-card is not stronger because you didn't have the ridiculous, horrible, stupid things that Vince Russo and Vince McMahon thought were a good idea, that were embarrassing at the time. At the time, it was embarrassing. Fucking giving birth to a hand, what the? And it was a white hand. I encourage everyone to look at my interview with Hank Young, son and hand of Mark Henry. It was a great interview on our comedy playlist, so check those out on our YouTube page. But there was some really horrible storylines that were embarrassing in WWE. Like, embarrassing. But one thing that cannot be disputed, at least at this point in time, but again, we're just getting started with this era. We got a lot to get to. There's a lot on the horizon. There's a lot of coals in the fire of where Triple H is going. But the top of the card, Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Undertaker, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit to a certain extent. These were icons, some of the greatest ever, arguably, and even Shawn Michaels for a small part of that. Mick Foley. I mean, I'm forgetting a lot of guys. But that main event scene in WWE at the time was the greatest ever, in my estimation. So that's one thing that this era needs to catch up on 100%, and I'll give it that. Then we're going to look at the tag team division. Well, you're going to be like, well, what about the Dudleys and Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys and APA and a slew of really entertaining tag teams they had? But let's also not forget that it was mostly dominated by a guy named the Road Dogg until about 1999. And even then, they got back into the mix when they turned heel with the Triple H and Stephanie McMahon angle, when DX was heel. So he was at the top of that tag team division for a long time, and the guy is a shit worker, an overrated promo, and not entertaining at all if you have more than 3 brain cells. Why do I say this? And by the way, no disrespect to Billy Gunn. I think Billy Gunn is awesome, and he's still getting over, and he's been a great wrestler, and he was a hell of a worker. But Road Dogg was the guy who did all the talking, but we know what he said every single time. He just went out there and did a ringmaster impersonation like he was in Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey with his ghetto country bullshit accent. And he would say the same thing over and over and over again. And then people would talk with him. And that's why it was over, because people like to hear themselves scream. And that's one of the reasons why fans go to WWE. He just ripped off a literally the ringmaster in a circus. That's all he did. And let me ask you a question. Do you remember one moment and one brilliant promo he ever cut? One. They were all the same thing over and over again. And then he'll pop some junk and throw a little bit of ghetto country slang at you. And then everyone thought he was great. He didn't inspire anything. He was terrible. He's one of those guys that I just don't understand where they got in the business. He was the worst Armstrong. There were probably children in the Armstrong family who were better workers than Jesse James Armstrong. So as great as the division became in 2000, 2001, 2002, and even into 2003, I think 2001, as great as it was, you had a shit division where you had Los Baricuas, you had the biker gang, the Disciples of Apocalypse, you had what are the dudes, the Mash and Smash or whatever the hell the names were, the Headbangers. I mean, this wasn't a quality division. These all would have been jobbers in the 80s. They would have been jobbers and they were jobbers by the time, a lot of them were jobbers by the time 2000 came around. So this tag team division in the beginning of the Attitude Era was dog shit. Because the New Age Outlaws, as much as we want to fantasize how good they were not great because Jesse James Armstrong was a terrible, terrible in-ring performer, and they didn't inspire any emotion in my eyes. So I'm not going to just blanketly throw the Attitude Era that they had the better tag team division, because this tag team division was great. You had the Usos, and, of course, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. Monster storyline. There was never a storyline that even came close in New Age Outlaw land that they had last year at that WrestleMania. That's what you want. People to be invested in that match and the titles. And everyone was invested in that match. It main evented WrestleMania. The first tag team title match ever to main event at WrestleMania. And again, you're seeing Triple H slowly but surely build this tag team division up. You have 6 tag teams are going to be showcased this WrestleMania coming up. He has monster plans for the tag division. I am certain of that. And so we're just getting started. So I am not giving the Attitude Era the tag team. I'd give a slight edge to this era right now in terms of what I think it's going to be. But right now, I'm going to give it a toss-up. So storylines overall are better in this era. Tag team is a toss-up. And the main event scene is still, I'll give to the Attitude Era. But the tag team division has potential to be much better to be top to bottom better. The storylines, it was such a disparity. The mid-card storylines were so terrible. But the biggest reason this era is the best era in WWE history, the women's division. Should we remind everybody what the Attitude Era women's division looked like? I'll give you a hint. It had Jerry Lawler yelling puppies 30 times a fucking episode. Not only was it embarrassing professional wrestling, embarrassing, it was misogynistic, it was sexist, it was disgusting. When I was done jerking off to him, I was appalled. I was a young man, for Christ's sake. Goddamn Sable. It's disgusting but the bottom line here is, folks, is that the women's division now is in my estimation, the greatest women's division of all time in WWE. And I don't even think it's close. And these young ladies bust their ass to become not models turned, I'm going to be a pro wrestler. And that was the whole Divas era too. And it carried on. It got a little bit better as the years went on. Not so chauvinistic. But until the 4 horsewomen showed up and then the NXT crop started coming up, this is now a fantastic women's division, which is every bit as compelling as the men's division. And there's been times where the women's division has been more compelling than the men's division. You know, sometimes when the bloodline's on one of their lulls, you had some fantastic things happening. Rhea Ripley is a phenomenon. And she's not even one of the 4 horsewomen that started this whole thing. Then you also have people like Liv Morgan. I mean, their mid-card women part of the women's division is fantastic. They got a viable tag team division they are building now in there. I mean, this is what women's professional wrestling looks like. That's what this is. This isn't a bra and panties match or a mud pit match or who can show their tits first match or who can bark like a dog or every other embarrassing chauvinistic thing that you know came from the mind of that old fucked pervert named Vince McMahon. Maybe some Vince Russo shit because wasn't like, as we talked about on our last episode, not like he was a brainiac with the pencil either. Viagra on a pole, you fucking bro. Hey, bro, I'm a genius, bro. Fucking twat. Anyway, I don't think Vince Russo has blocked my new Twitter account yet, so I'm trying to work toward that. He blocked my last one. Anyway, but that's the reality. The women's division was a disgrace, and it's embarrassing. Embarrassing. They were barely, and any of them were barely real professional wrestlers outside of but then again, there were real good ones. You had people like Ivory and Jackie and Molly Holly. There were some great ones too, but I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the Sables, all of the bra and titty matches, and I'm talking about Jerry Lawler talking about puppies every 5 minutes. It was celebrated that these women were objects. These women today aren't looked at as objects. They're looked at as professional fucking wrestlers. And that is the biggest reason. And I think that is what tips the scales. And the other part is, folks, this era is going to be better because we're just getting started. Most of this main event scene is in their mid to late 30s. Some are in their the early to mid 40s. But even at that point, people like Randy Orton, LA Knight, AJ Styles. But even at that point, they still all have a long way to go, particularly Knight and Orton, because the way they work doesn't tax your body. And they're also been in the game long enough to know where they can protect themselves as much as possible. That's the thing. I mean, your main event scene here, and by the way, this main event scene might eclipse the Attitude Era but I don't know. When you talk about the legends in the Attitude Era, like again, Kurt Angle, Undertaker, Austin, Rock, Triple H, Jericho, Kane, Mick Foley. I mean, the main event scene was incredible. And throwing in McMahon here and there, jumping off of 50-foot things. But with this one we have Randy Orton as over organically as a babyface as he's ever been. LA Knight, possibly. Cody Rhodes. Sami Zayn, possibly. Gunther, possibly. Obviously, you still have Roman. Is Jey Uso going to make a step to the main event? We'll see, despite his name. And I'm not even mentioning, and there's like Seth Rollins still. I mean, I'm forgetting guys. Drew McIntyre. This main event scene is cooking. And it could eclipse the Attitude Era in time. As of right now, I still got to give it to the Attitude Era. Besides that, most of it's a toss-up, or this era is clearly winning. And the areas where this area wins, it's a landslide. An absolute landslide. The mid-card storylines aren't embarrassing now. They're not something that I would worry about showing my daughter. Same with the women's division. They were embarrassing during the Attitude Era. So the great was great, but the bad was bad. So let's stop romanticizing the Attitude Era like it's the greatest thing ever, because we're watching the greatest thing ever. Ladies and gentlemen, that's been your moment in the Valley. This is Silicon Steve Valley. Thank you, Vigilante Talks. Check him out on TikTok and YouTube. You can hit up the subscribe button if you like us, and you can follow us on Facebook. And we also have a fan group. We want to get more people involved in that. We have some exciting things happening toward the week of WrestleMania. We're getting cooking. In fact, I got to get to work because I got to get some shit in line. But that's all I want to say there. And if, of course, YouTube, subscribe, follow us everywhere you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening to Moment in the Valley, presented to you by High Spots and Cheap Pops. Here endeth the lesson.